Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Ecosystem and IR webinar. We're just going to give everyone a few minutes to join the session. So if you just wait a minute or two and I'll kick things off. Thank you. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're ready to start. Audrey and Jason, I just check you can see my screen okay?
Yep, all good.
Yep, all good, great. Okay. Well, in that case, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from today. And thanks very much for taking the time to be here. My name is Chris White from Ecosystem, and I'll be your host for today. So Ecosystem is a technology research and advisory company headquartered in Singapore. And I'm pleased that today we're joined by one of our most seasoned analysts in the future of work and collaboration. This, of course, is Audrey William, Principal Advisor, as I mentioned, future of work, workplace collaboration, and also contact centers. So she's an expert in the areas, as you can imagine, of enterprise collaboration, unified comms, and contact centers and customer experience. We're also joined by Jason Andrews, who's head of Collaborate products at IR, who'll be sharing some insights into what some of their customers are doing and providing some firsthand experience to today's discussion. What I'd like to do, if I can just quickly go to the next slide, is, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So you'll see at the bottom of the screen, there is a Q&A button. So if you click on that, then a little window will pop up and you can put your question in there and we'll come to that at the end of the session. Alternatively, if you're a little bit shy, you can just send it to me privately and I'll read the question out on your behalf. So I hope you find today's session useful and enjoyable. Please let us know if there's anything we can do to make your experience more fruitful. Now that that's out of the way, I'd now like to hand over to Audrey, who is going to get us started. So Audrey, over to you, please.
Thanks. Thank you, Chris. Share my screen. Just looking okay? Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah, all good.
Good morning, as Chris says, good morning, good afternoon, and I guess good evening from wherever you're dialing in from today. It gives me great pleasure to talk to you about a very important topic in the industry today as we all embrace hybrid work. It's so important to look at the many aspects of hybrid work to make it work well, because it's not as simple as it sounds. And that's why planning around how you get hybrid work to be successful is something organizations need to pay attention to. So I will be sharing data throughout my presentation from the different studies. And this was released earlier in the year by Ecosystem from our Voice of Employee study. And the one thing that is here to stay, as you can see from this deck, is the work environment will remain hybrid. 38% of knowledge workers want to work from a location of their choice today, and that is likely to increase. In fact, when I looked at the data again today, there's a trending towards 50%. So clearly, employees today want that flexibility, and you can see that 51% want to choose their work location, including the office, but only 10% want to work from the office all the time. And these dynamics are, very important to pay attention to, because it also will impact the way you design your new offices, the way you recalibrate what the future of work should be like. And if I dissect that data further now from the same data I just presented, you can see that, there's a contrast as well with the different age groups. for the 55 to 64-year-olds, and then the 65-year-olds and above, that there is a lesser tendency to, just entirely embrace working entirely from home. In fact, there is a tendency to actually want to be more in the office, which is very interesting. And it's the same with the 45 to the 54 years demographic. And then if you look in the contrast of that in the first two bars, you can see that with the younger generation, the millennials, and then the 24 to 34-year age group, they actually want more flexibility. They want to be able to work from more locations, because you can see that the red bar comes out really strongly. And they don't necessarily want to work entirely from the workplace. So what this means is, and again, this differs by regions, and, we can look at the differences, even if you look at this from an Asia Pacific versus Europe and North America angle. But I think what this calls for is IT teams, facilities management and HR to really start paying attention to these dynamics, because it will impact our workspaces, the way you work remotely, the types of spaces that you need at work, in the office, and this will play a very important part in that whole design aspect. And when we looked at our digital priority study, which was released and something that we tracked throughout the COVID period, we found that there was a great desire to go back to the office. And interestingly, you can see that only 22% actually want to reduce commercial office space. So, that's a global number. So that's quite a strong number if you think about it, that with all the setbacks we've seen, that not many enterprises are actually going to cut back on real estate. But what is changing is they're re-looking at how the layout should be. So that old-fashioned style of working where we were all used to sitting beside each other in cubicles, I don't think that's here to stay for very much longer, because a lot of renovations are going on today. But the one thing I'd like to draw your attention to is also, if you look at the 51%, there's a huge increase today towards the usage of collaboration and video conferencing tools and technologies and applications. And that's just growing. In fact, I was just having a chat this morning with one of my clients who is looking to build a new office in the Sydney CBD. And he was actually telling me that there's a lot of thinking they have to do around managing how meetings are done remotely, from a cafe, from any workspace, right down to the home. And you can see that 44% want to use more digital technology to drive greater employee experience. And virtual meetings are not going away anytime soon. They're used extensively. And in hybrid work, it's finding the balance to get these things right. That's really important, because ultimately you want to drive the best possible experience for your employees. And one of the things that we asked employees as part of the Voice of Employee study is what are some of the technologies that will really matter to them in hybrid? What is it that employers must do to provide that best-in-class experience? And you can see that 50% have rated that video conferencing will be important, and 42% want large monitors and screens. 36% are saying that there is a need actually for more open spaces. And if you look at this whole chart, it really talks about the importance of providing your employees with the best-in-class technology. But you've also got to ensure that at the same time, whether it's the camera or the headsets or the digital whiteboards, or just your monitors, you've got to make sure that nothing can go wrong from a networking perspective, from a security perspective, from an interoperability perspective. And this is why planning hybrid requires a lot of real governance around how you look at bringing it all together, because you can have all the technology and all the equipment, but you really have to also ensure that there is minimal disruption. So constant innovation is essential to build a resilient work from anywhere model. And today across the globe, from North America to the Middle East, Europe, right down to this part of the world in Asia Pacific, there are constant experimentations going on. There's no one fixed formula, and this is going to continue throughout the next few years. So there is a need to redefine work design, and you can speak to a lot of people in the industry today, and they're probably telling you about how they're working, but also how their office looks like. And the design aspect of it is very important because you've now got to think about how many huddle rooms you actually need for brainstorming sessions, and that might be equipped with video conferencing tools. How many quiet and open spaces you need, because sometimes employees just want to have that quietness like what they had at home, or they might just use it to catch up with a colleague if they're coming in, once a fortnight, for example. And then you've got to think about the open plan. So, you can see the bit at the bottom. The open plan is really important because sometimes you have too many people talking over each other. They're all wearing headsets, but if no one goes on mute, you can get a lot of background noise. So how do you eradicate that? And then outside of this layer, you've now got to think about the remote workers as well. So it's highly likely that when you're having meetings, you're also going to have some of your employees dial in from other locations. And in many countries around the world, employees have moved to smaller cities. They've left the bigger cities, so now they're working remotely. And you've got to cater for them because they will likely come in, probably every fortnight or less regularly than some of the other employees. But whatever the dynamic is, you want to make sure that everything works. There are no outages, no downtimes. And with the multiple user platforms today across Microsoft Teams, Cisco WebEx, Zoom, and many others, sometimes this can give rise to interoperability issues. So how do you avoid that to ensure that everything is working well? How do you design the rooms to have the best-in-class audio features and acoustic features, but also ensure that nothing goes wrong? And I think this is where a lot of planning comes into making this whole thing resilient. So in a complex multi-vendor ecosystem, having an end-to-end monitoring solution for the network, devices, video conferencing systems, headsets, and digital tools is a must to prepare for all eventualities. And now, I'm sure a lot of you today hear about immersive tech and the metaverse. And what this means is, as we in the enterprise sector, we get exposed to holograms, we get exposed to metaverse, we get exposed to AR and virtual reality tools. And then you've got, your day-to-day applications that you're using, which, could be Zoom and Teams and a lot of other collaboration platforms. So all of a sudden, you're having a lot of different spaces that you're working with. So this is no longer just about devices, but having a lot of spaces intersect with each other for daily communication. And that can sometimes give rise to interoperability issues. So how do you bulletproof that, is very important in keeping hybrid going. So one of the things that I talked about earlier from all the different dynamics is, as you plan that future of work, the new workplace design, as you plan how open spaces should be like, you plan the different technologies, you now want to ensure that nothing can go wrong and that there is a bulletproof mechanism here. So how do you look at network troubleshooting? How do you ensure that all your endpoints are working if you have thousands of workers scattered across the globe and in the country itself? You want to make sure that all endpoints are working. There's no outage, but if there's an outage, what happens? What's the backup? How are you using analytics intelligently to identify the problem before it occurs? So that's really proactive monitoring. How are you doing automated continuous testing? And of course, security measures continue to be very important. This is especially so in hybrid because you want to ensure that the workplace is secure. So I think, as we embark on this journey towards hybrid, and, it's an experimentation, as I mentioned earlier, that there's a lot of thinking that needs to be done. It's important to go through some of these questions with the vendor you're working with, the service provider, as well as your internal team, to just understand if your infrastructure, devices, and rooms, are they set up for the success of hybrid work? How quickly and easily can IT teams adapt to multiple workplace scenarios? Are you involving your employees to be part of the planning process? And that's really important right now. And a lot of the findings I shared earlier from our Voice of Employee study is really about what employees are dictating and saying what their preferences of work are. And it's important to pay attention to that, because that's how you will get hybrid to be successful, to take the feedback and then build around that. Are you evolving your business continuity plan continually so that you are prepared for anything that happens? How are you monitoring security and the performance of your technologies? Do you have access to real-time data to make the right decisions? And that's true today. You need analytics at your fingertips, because you really want to see an outage or an issue with the network, or even possibly everyone's headsets as they're in a very big session or presentation, and you want to take the right measures accordingly. Are the employees satisfied with the unified communications and collaboration tools they're using? It's something worth checking from time to time. And then finally, are you thinking about workflow integration to video and other digital technology? So there's quite a bit to think about. But we'll move to a more interesting session after this, because I'd like to invite Jason Andrews now for the fireside chat. And I want to thank you for your time for listening to the data that I presented, as well as the slides, which you will get as part of the recording. But without further ado, I'd like to invite Jason Andrews, Head of Collaborate Products at IR, to join me. So welcome, Jason. Great to have you here.
Hi, Audrey. Thanks.
One second. Actually, I'll need to revert to my notes, Chris.
Okay, you've stopped sharing then? There you go.
Yeah. So I think, just to kick things off, Jason, with the work from anywhere model, from the data I presented, millennials and the younger generation are preferring to work from multiple locations and are demanding greater flexibility. And if we go deeper, we're finding that there is a preference for a 4-day work week, and in some instances, a 3-day work week. But many don't want to go back to that 5-day work week at all. Any thoughts, Jason, on what this means for IT teams and business leaders looking to prepare the enterprise for this new era of work?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, this one of flexibility, isn't it? When we look at this 5 days, 4 days, what question or what problem are we really trying to solve? Are we reducing intensity? Is it about productivity versus time, employee well-being? You quoted the millennials and Generation Z or Z, depending on where you're watching from, but they too have a fear of not necessarily learning professional workplace skills, so the soft skills that you pick up when you're in an office. So there's a huge trade-off here that maybe not appreciating, but on that topic, I think Tim Cook recently said that this was the mother of all experiments, right? I think the first thing to keep in mind is that I think we're all going to make mistakes as we try and get this right, and try and achieve that flexibility balance that people are looking for. And some of the questions we need to start, think about, or should have thought about really, is what does collaboration look like in an environment like that? So as you're looking at that ask for flexibility, how do people collaborate? How do you coordinate in-person activities? There are certain things that are easier or perceived to be easier in person, but having said that, there will now always be potentially someone or several people that you're trying to pull together that are going to be remote. So, how do you facilitate that in that hybrid working world? What's the environment that you're going to have to provide to people? And how do you manage that environment to get the most out of it, to ensure that, A, it's working, but B, you're getting that return and maximizing that employee experience? And I think they're the things that we really need to start having front of mind is that complicated environments that we are going to have in place to be able to facilitate that style of working.
No, thank you, Jason. Great insights. And one thing that's here to stay is that the office will not look the same like what we used to just over 3 years ago. It will still be the same in some industries, but for most, we will not go back to the office where everyone was in one room or in a room with many cubicles and workstations. It's now about open spaces, quiet spots, huddle rooms. And then you have to also think about the remote workforce. What is your advice for IT leaders, Jason, looking to make this sort of working style successful?
Yeah, I think you sort of had the answer in the question there, Audrey, which is think about the remote workforce. There's a lot of technology out there, a lot of tools available for effective collaboration, and how do you apply those in that new work environment paradigm? So, you call out huddle rooms a moment ago. What does that look like for the remote participants that you're going to have to cater to? They're going to need to be supported with tooling, and you're again going to need to ensure that the employee experience is there so that when they're communicating from wherever they are in the world, because potentially these are distributed teams we're talking about too. It's not just necessarily people that couldn't get to the office that day. This applies as much to that distributed workforce as it does working from home, right? And so how do you include them? How do they get to participate? And how do you ensure that they can participate? And these are the things that, are going to drive the success of that working style that you're referring to.
And I think you touched on it, participation. And I think that's one challenge that's likely going to emerge with a remote workforce, communicating with a team that is in the office and how everyone will be represented in that meeting, especially for those that are dialing in. So more like creating equal representation, if you will, and giving everyone a space and a voice. Is that happening today, Jason? What do you think enterprises should start thinking about?
I think we've had 2 years to evolve the way we do these things, right? But I do also think that sometimes we take for granted that we run meetings well.
Absolutely.
Especially when you've got remote participants. And so, we've all been in a bad meeting, right? And when you're doing that when you're in a bad meeting and it's remote, the experience is even worse. And so, I think there is a level of training we probably still need to be thinking about people that run meetings. That inclusivity part is lacking, or we really dive in on making sure that everyone on the call has had a chance to introduce themselves, allowing people to have a bit of small talk at the start of meetings, because some of these people are remote more often than not. Even meeting courtesy, not speaking over the top of people, and that can be hard with the small time delays, right? And so
happens all the time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Some people are looking at, do we have a video on culture in the workplace? And that's an interesting topic in and of itself, right? How do you give introverts a voice and not allow the dominant extroverts to drive the conversation, whereby, personality types don't necessarily relate to, they don't at all relate to the quality of input that people have. But when you're in the position of running that meeting, you need to surface that. And so, as I said, the video on culture, you need to not let the technology get in the way of that inclusivity part. And so to that end, you need to make sure that the ecosystem is behaving as you intended, supporting, your ability to build culture within your teams and reinforce or, provide that positive employee experience that everybody's looking to put out there to ensure that they retain their employees.
No, absolutely. I think we take it for granted, right? When a meeting starts and we think, that's how it's going to go. But I think equal representation, making it work, thinking about the remote workforce, like you said, they're not there often. You've also got to give them a voice. And I think all of this plays a role in making hybrid successful, especially when you have a dispersed workforce in multiple cities across the globe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my own team, I'm in Melbourne along with one of my team members. I've got 2 in Sydney, 3 in Sydney, and 1 in New Jersey. And looking to have, more people, and that's just within my own team. And so, this becomes a critical part of making sure that, we can work effectively as a group. And that's, that's my own heuristic example. And I know I'm not alone.
And I think you also have the other issue, Jason, when everyone's in the office and they're talking to the remote workforce and they're sitting in the boardroom, they've all the video conferencing equipment there. Well, again, how do all the voices or tiles be represented equally is also an important aspect.
Absolutely.
And Jason, one thing I keep hearing over and again from my discussion with business leaders is managing interoperability issues. And I faced this situation when we were on a call recently. I was on Zoom calls, and I'm not sure if you remember, then I had to log on to Teams and my audio was not working. But that's just one example. And if you're presenting to a board of directors or you've got a very important meeting or a presentation, these things are important to look at. Is this a common problem, Jason? Anything you can elaborate around interoperability, and what should companies do to prepare themselves better for these types of issues? Yeah,
I think we've all had an experience like the one that you ran into recently when we were talking.
Yes.
And I know I've had it happen to myself, and I people in our office alone have seen it too. There is a challenge there. On the plus side, in fairness, at Enterprise Connect recently, Microsoft, Cisco, and Zoom sort of all agreed that they should improve the interoperability, but these are challenges that I think we're going to have to live with in the near term. There are probably some easy things that people can do, like making sure the client updates are applied automatically where possible. But really, that having that visibility into the entire ecosystem for the users is probably one of the key things that we can do. How do you see what's going on in those circumstances? If people contact you after the fact and say, I had this problem, being able to troubleshoot that and say, okay, well, this is what we can see happen post event. And, maybe in future, even in real time, be able to see those things happen. There'd certainly be a lot of benefit in that, in having the tooling in place to do that, in the way you can today, and catering to what, should be possible in future as, more real-time data about these calls becomes available in the monitoring suites.
No, thanks. Great insights. And, just from that data I presented around employees wanting more flexibility, employees want to be more in control now of their work. So, clearly human centricity has taken center stage, and it is what the new era of work is about. How can employers make sure that employees perform at the best possible levels? How can they attract more talent? How can they make the workplace more dynamic? Jason, what should managers start thinking about in ensuring that you can work from anywhere with minimal or zero disruption?
Minimal disruption, yeah. I don't know that zero is quite possible yet, but absolutely. Look, I think you nailed it up front, right? Though there's this idea of flexibility people want, but we also need to collaborate. I think Microsoft did a study where they came up with a triple peak day, where you've got these sort of core collaboration hours or core work hours, where there's sort of peaks at around 10 in the morning, around 2 in the afternoon, and often later in the evening. And so if you think about it, there are key times when you can collaborate, and there are the times to get the work done. And you can see from a study like that was not so much interviewing people, it was monitoring the usage of the tool sets. So, to that end, you can see that if you provide a vehicle whereby you've got time where, it's known that collaboration takes place, you've got, and around that, you've got your time to get the work done that needs doing, right? It does present challenges in how do you measure productivity and performance. We've got the same problem of how do you measure culture, and how do you lead an environment like that? And so, this is where I think we really need to sort of focus on. It's that idea of when can you collaborate, or how do you coordinate that collaboration, which I think we spoke about a few minutes ago, and being able to say, right, this is where we need you to be able to interact, collaborate, ideate, and all those good things, and having that tool set available that will perform and facilitate that, and then allowing people the flexibility to get their work done around that, as it suits their life, and that really speaks to the flexibility that people are really trying to drive to in some of the asks, I think.
No, great. Thanks, Jason. And now on to a futuristic topic, and I think one that the audience would like to know more about the metaverse. As of now, we're hearing more about it from a, I guess, gaming perspective. But if you look at this from an enterprise perspective, it'll be good to get your thoughts on how do you see metaverse playing out, and how should enterprises prepare themselves for new technologies in the immersive space?
Oh, it's early days, isn't it? I don't know if you remember, but during the pandemic, you might recall there was a fireside chat between Oprah Winfrey and then President Barack Obama, and it was entirely remote. And that was done on a green screen, and they were talking to digital renditions of each other, essentially. From I think he was in a studio in Washington, and she was in her home on the West Coast. And so when we talk about the metaverse, is it that far off, or are we sort of already there? Because I'm talking to you, and yet it's not you; it's a digital representation of you, and vice versa, right? So we're working with, if you like, the foundational building blocks of the metaverse today. It's really the digitization of what we do and of work. I like to look. I read something recently that said Web3 is not about crypto, but I certainly look to the crypto space to start to ideate around where this whole thing is going. And I saw an interview with one of the thought leaders, Raoul Pal, recently, and he was speaking about the role of NFTs in the metaverse and virtual collaboration spaces, and how he went through the process of building a digital office for his business, and how it is very much akin to building a home in the real world. And putting NFTs on display and things like that. But if you play that out, you can essentially have a virtual collaboration space, a 3D construct. I've got my Oculus over there that I play with. You have an avatar of yourself potentially. Now, we come back to this idea of ideating, collaborating, and how do you facilitate that? Potentially having a virtual representation of yourself in a 3D workspace. That's one possibility. And so, as I said, looking to that NFT space, the crypto space, it sort of gives you a bit of an insight. I've read articles where people have bought essentially digital land to build and lease out spaces for the purposes of collaboration, like I just described. And so, that's going to add complexity into these collaboration environments.
Absolutely.
Because there's going to be more data streams, more data flowing. It's just something else that can potentially break from yet another vendor in that technology ecosystem. And so, you really need to have a solution that can keep tabs on whether all of these pieces that you introduce are performing. And especially, in that virtual space, you start leasing NFTs to do collaboration. There's going to be a cost attached to that, and you want to make sure that you're getting the performance you need out of it. So, look, exciting times. Change is fantastic, but who knows what the future looks like? Is it going to be Ready Player One style, or is it going to be these experiences that we that we have today? it's an interesting space.
No, I think it's interesting, right? And I think if you look at the vendors as well in the video conferencing space and the collaboration space, they're pushing for the way we collaborate today to be different. They're talking about holograms, and clearly I think the form factor will change rather than all of us just looking at each other right now on tiles like this, where it's got to be more immersive and, like you said, avatars, but also how you can almost like meet that person in reality. And I think when that happens as well, Jason, we'll still be using some of our traditional technologies. And there are days when we will want to go into a traditional video call, but that means that there are a lot of platforms intersecting with each other. So
absolutely, yeah.
Nothing should go wrong, but like you said, something will go wrong.
Well, then even the hologram, you're still going to need a camera of some sort to capture that hologram, right? There's still going to be audio capture devices. So, all of these things will still be relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. No, many thanks, Jason, for your great insights. And I think we've got a few questions as well from the audience. So I'll take the first one.
We've had a few. I've answered one of them privately. David sent through a question, but David, I've replied to you separately. So there's a couple more, and if anyone has any more, please use the Q&A button at the bottom, or you can send me a message. So the first one is looking at challenges faced with security of data. So this one is with the work from anywhere model. We're concerned about how employees are accessing their data from home. What measures can we take to make this better for our organization?
Good question. I'm not a security expert, no, I'm not going to profess to be, but I think therein lies the first key, right? Find a security expert first and foremost. Now, there are plenty of tools out there. I mean, we've all seen multi-factor. We see within the Microsoft suite now, there's data classifications, having a data classification policy and things like this. These are all policies that, I mean, we've had our chief security officer just roll some of these things out, but certainly engage a professional, an expert that understands the space. I think it's fairly well accepted these days that the devices we use, while in many cases they're expensive, they're basically disposable if you compare that to the value of the data that we store on those devices. And so definitely worth the investment to make sure you're safeguarding data and data movement in the new paradigm.
All right, thank you. Audrey, you got anything to add onto that one?
No, I think Jason covered that well. The only thing I'll say is with hybrid work, and when you've got a large workforce working remotely, and again, depending on the industries they're in, like let's say financial services, I think remote working will definitely give rise to all sorts of security threats. And I think it's clearly a very big concern right now out there for a lot of enterprises.
Cool, thank you. And this is the last one that I have, but if there's any more, please let us know. So the other one is saying, so this question said that they're redesigning their office space, I guess, Audrey, based on some of the things that you mentioned, and adding more meeting rooms and open meeting spaces. They are looking for a UC monitoring solution. What are some of the things that they should be looking for?
I feel like that's a good on-ramp to IR Collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
So look, we have the broad ecosystem view within IR Collaborate. As we've spoken about this evening, my time, this is a complex ecosystem that we're trying to manage. There's a bunch of devices that the user consumes. There's network connectivity, many cases from their home off into the ether, and then over to the provider of the collaboration tool, be it Microsoft Zoom, Cisco WebEx, or whoever it might be. And you really need to get enough insight in that collaboration environment to be able to see that when you are trying to troubleshoot where things are going wrong. And I'll paint a very simplistic picture. You know, there can be more moving parts than that as you start adding voice channels into the mix. And then you've got collaboration space devices as well, which we also have a solution to manage at IR. So, you know, you really take a look at what it is that you're rolling out, and that sort of gives you a sense of what you need to make sure works. And from there, that's when you start looking to say, okay, I've got a multi-vendor environment, I've got all these moving parts. How do I get visibility to make sure that I'm getting the return on that? And that's where, you know, IR can generate that picture as people are having their calls, and if they're having trouble, they're calling in saying, you know, help me out here, I'm having a persistent issue. You know, is it the user's device? Is it the network? Who controls what? Who's responsible for what elements? These are all things that you need to be able to call out very quickly to see whether or not you can do something about it, or if to pick up the phone and call a provider. And you know, these are the things that we like to bring to the table.
Anything else to add, Audrey? Anything from you?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is, as Jason mentioned, I think if you want to get hybrid to work successfully, you've got to make sure that you don't run into any of these interoperability issues. And I think you've got a dispersed workforce across multiple geographies, multiple locations. You're presenting to a large audience. The last thing you want is everyone's audio just drops, their video is not working. But it's not just the real-time monitoring that I think is important. It's also the proactive monitoring, you know, how far by using analytics, you can see that something is going to go wrong in a big way, and you can really alert the team about it. And I think that's the power of a good monitoring solution.
Cool. All right. So we've got, we don't have any more questions, but also we've only got 2 minutes left of our allotted time. So, Jason, Audrey, any closing remarks before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I'll just close out by saying, you know, I think users sort of expect that same level of experience with enterprise tools as what they get with the consumer tools. You know, you pick up your phone and FaceTime and it just works. And that's really the experience people are wanting from their work environment. Only there's a far greater degree of complexity involved in trying to provide that experience, you know, as we've spoken about already, multiple vendors, multiple technology sets, multiple network channels underpinning all of these things. And we are all still working out how to hybrid, right? And what does that look like? And we're still sort of, you know, accepting that we're going to make mistakes along the way. And so make sure you can get that end-to-end visibility that we just spoke about. Because the core platforms are only part of the ecosystem. You really need to be able to get the full view when problems occur to make sure you're getting the maximum value out of your investment.
Yeah, the one thing that I'll talk about is hybrid is definitely here to stay based on the research I presented, the data I presented about how employees are now dictating the terms. They're talking more about greater flexibility. It doesn't mean that the office will go away, but the two spaces will be important. So thinking about that new workplace design, workspaces, and just making everything come together. It sounds easy, but I think Jason touched on some very good points throughout the webinar today, that whilst you can have all the best tools and technologies, you've got to make sure that everything works, because you don't want too much downtime. And I think this will impact employee experience.
All right, fantastic. So it's exactly 45 minutes. So with that, I would like to thank you all for your time today. There will be an on-demand version of this webinar available to you afterwards, so please keep an eye out for that. Audrey's details are up on screen, so if you have any questions for Audrey, please feel free to drop her a note. But with that, I'd like to thank Audrey and Jason, and thank all of you for joining us, and I hope you have an enjoyable rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.